Well, good evening and welcome to a very special evening with a conversation about the Winnipeg Art Gallery and the almost complete Inuit Art Centre being built in downtown Winnipeg, adjacent to the Winnipeg Art Gallery. And we are so thrilled to have two of the most expert people in the world to talk about the Inuit Art Centre from two very different perspectives. We have Michael Maltzan with us. Michael is the architect of the Inuit Art Centre. Michael, welcome.
Thank you very much. Glad to be here.
And I won't try to go through your resume because it is very long and very complex. And I'm going to introduce Heather as well, Dr. Heather Igloliorti, who is the curator of the first exhibition that will be at the Inuit Art Centre. Hello, Heather.
Good evening. Thanks for having me.
Nakawik, I'll say to you for joining us. Now, I want those watching to get a better sense of your capacities involved with the Inuit Art Centre. Heather, a brief description of your background in Inuit art would really help us to get a better sense of the depth of your opinion.
Sure, thank you. Okay, so I'm Dr. Heather Igloliorti. I'm an Inuk from Nunavut. My father's an Inuk and my mom is a Newfoundlander. And I have been working in Inuit and other Indigenous arts for the last 15 years. I'm currently the only Inuk in the country to hold a PhD in Inuit art history, although of course there's been many other Inuit curators and art historians. But the Winnipeg Art Gallery is home to the first ever full-time Inuit curator, or the first in the WAG's history and maybe the first in the country's history. And I have been so excited to see that develop. I've been working in museums and galleries. I just last night I was looking at my CV and I said, oh my God, I've worked on almost 30 exhibitions in the last 15 years. And currently have 2 shows touring nationally and internationally. And I'm the lead guest curator for the new exhibition Eniweed, which is going to be the first to open at the Inuit Art Centre. But I'm not the only curator. I'm working with 3 other really amazing emerging curators as well.
Okay, Heather, thank you for that. And Michael, if you could give us a capsule description of you and your practice, the practice for the Michael Maltzan Architecture started what, in 95, is that correct?
1995 in Los Angeles, and the practice is centered in LA, but we work internationally, Europe, China, and have been very fortunate to be working in Winnipeg on the Inuit Art Centre. Our work is varied in terms of the different types of programs that we take on in the buildings we're involved with. We though do quite a bit of cultural work and institutional work with a real concentration around museums, galleries, and exhibition spaces. I'm very dedicated, focused on that kind of work because in those spaces you get to work with collections and exhibitions that express something important, meaningful to culture. And that's exactly what you hope architecture does as well.
And with us this evening as well, of course, is Stephen Boris, without whom this entire project would not be happening. Hello, Stephen Boris.
Good evening, Terry.
And so introduce us to, so for those who are not, I mean, in Winnipeg, you're a cultural hero, and across the country people know you, but tell us a bit more about who you are and what your involvement is with the WAG and the Inuit Art Centre.
I've been the director and CEO of the WAG for the last 12 years. You know, I grew up in Winnipeg, but I returned 12 years ago to work on this project, which has taken longer than I anticipated, but it was worth every day I've been involved. It's been my dream to see this happen, but really I see myself simply as a facilitator, bringing together the right people, the right voices to make this happen. And more than a building, although it's an extraordinary building, it is really a conversation, a response, an act of reconciliation as we respond to specific calls across the country. So to be involved in this project right now in Winnipeg, in Canada, is extraordinarily exciting huge responsibility and honor to be setting new examples for how museums can work with Indigenous communities and how we can contribute more to the larger dialogue.
What makes Winnipeg the right place to be the home of the Inuit Art Centre?
Winnipeg's in the north, although it's the south to the Inuit. It has this extraordinary population, treaty run, Métis homeland. So you have this mixing of First Nations, Métis, Inuit people with non-Indigenous. But of course, the WAG has a 60-year-old history with collecting, documenting, exhibiting Inuit art. It was across the street from the Hudson Bay Company, and so it had a tie to the north. And we had been collecting Inuit art since the 1950s. We've exhibited, published more than any museum in the world. And while I wouldn't consider us the authority, I feel we have pushed forward the agenda of Inuit art. And not only is our collection the largest of its kind, I believe there's a moment right now in Winnipeg, in Canada, that the WAG can play a leadership role with this project.
Heather Igliorti, I was lucky enough to live in the Arctic for a while and saw firsthand the creation of art by very young Inuit people that I made friends with. A 10-year-old used to came to our house once with a chunk of soapstone and said, "I need to buy a new hockey stick. Will you lend me $5? And I will leave the soapstone with you, and then I'll come back and carve it if I can go get the hockey stick," which he did. And he carved this piece, by the way, which I still have and treasure. But what is it about what is the aesthetic of Inuit art? I know it's a very general question, but how would you describe the art that is created by Inuit people?
Well, first let me say, that's a really impressive piece to be made by a 10-year-old. I think you got the better end of that bargain, but of course he got the hockey stick, so that's fantastic. I think that Inuit art is anything made by Inuit. And maybe a lot of people who are watching the call right now or might watch this later would, something comes to mind for them right away when they think about Inuit art. And that could be, Arctic animals like owls, polar bears, and all these really beautiful things that we've created in print and sculptural means and so on. And then, there's a lot of Inuit music. I think people think about that when they think about Inuit art as well. But we're really excited about this first exhibition and everything that's coming up, because for us, the Inuit aesthetic is anything made by Inuit. And so in the inaugural exhibition, we have installation and photography and video and sculptures and prints and paintings and all kinds of things that we're hoping are going to really show Inuit art back to Inuit and then to broad audiences.
Michael Maltzan, what was it about this project that made you want to be part of it?
This project had what I thought was a really fundamental, essential question that Stephen and his team asked from the very beginning, and that was, how do you make a building for Inuit art at this moment in our culture? What does that mean? What does that look like? How does it operate? How does it help create and foster a conversation? Those are all things that are extraordinarily exciting to think about as an architect. Architecture is fundamentally, of course, about making a building that functions well for the people who are working there, in this case for the collection, for the visitors. But then architecture has the ability to represent, communicate, say something beyond that about values, about ambitions, about aspirations, and again, about culture. And it does that in a number of ways, but a lot of it is by the way it tries to help foster connections between people, between spaces, in this case, between the new Inuit Art Centre building and the Gustavo da Roza Winnipeg Art Gallery that exists on the site. Those challenges those are motivating challenges for an architect. That's an exciting thing to think about taking on. Daunting a bit, but very exciting.
Stephen, Boris, what challenges did you face when deciding 12 years ago that this was a project that you were going to bring to life?
You know, I think the biggest challenge was rethinking the narrative of how Inuit art has been presented, particularly in Canada for the last 60 years, which has largely been done by non-Indigenous voices. And this was a chance for us to rethink the whole pedagogical structure of how this art, this culture has been presented and documented and shared, and how in fact, even Winnipeggers have seen Inuit art. And you know, for me, there are two types of architects. There are architects who go to museums and those that don't. And so with Michael, he understood the vocabulary, the curatorial agenda, museum methodology, looking at and rethinking the role of the object and Inuit art simply as contemporary art. So we quickly were able to advance that discourse and get to a place, and I believe Michael won the competition because he asked us the questions we didn't know the answers for, but those continue to drive us in this goal.
But Stephen, Boris, the raising the money for a project as large and as worldwide important as this, what did that take?
It would have been a lot harder if we were simply raising money to build a new space, to exhibit, to store. But this project, the value proposition was about a new conversation, a different forum in which to present and to shift the narrative so that the first voice the audience sees and hears is the Inuit voice. That helped greatly. I would say the TRC's calls to action for museums,
the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, yes.
Pushed us to respond to how we work, how we function as a museum, as a cultural body. Those things helped greatly in raising the money because we were raising awareness of something that was critical in our country.
Michael Maltzan, you're in demand all over the world as an architect. Why did you choose this project here in Winnipeg?
Well, thank you for saying, why did I choose it? I feel very fortunate that this project chose us because it was certainly, there were many architects who were interested and motivated to try to work with the art gallery on this project. You know, as I said before, this project had aspects of it that I thought were exciting to try to imagine how to make architectural form. How do you create a space, for instance, for Inuit art that is changing, that is evolving? Most people, at least when we first started working with this project, knew primarily the sculptures and the carvings that the Inuit have made. And many times those are smaller carvings and that you can hold them in your hand, like the carving you showed us.
Yeah.
But Inuit art is being affected by culture all around it, changes in society. And there are now different media that the artists are working in. The scale is changing. I think Heather talked about that when she was talking about the first show that will open the center and how varied Inuit art is now. That's a challenge for the architecture to try to be able to show that widest range of that art in the best possible way, and to try to make a building that anticipates, or at least tries to anticipate, how that art is going to continue to evolve.
What visual stimulation did you find in thinking about what you wanted the building to look like from the exterior, especially at this point, to capture the Arctic nature of the Inuit. What inspiration did you find for that?
Well, we were involved already in working on the design of the building, and Stephen knows this very well. And developing different approaches and different iterations to the form of the building, the spaces of the building. But I kept feeling like something was missing. I kept feeling like we weren't quite hitting it. We were doing a good job, I thought, relating to the city around, or how the building would relate to the city around the new Inuit Art Centre, and how we were creating some relationships with the existing WAG. But there was something more fundamental that I felt like we were missing, and that was around the time that Stephen and Darlene Wight organized a trip for us to go to the north, and that was 2013. My family came with me. We had a bit of an expedition there and stayed for a little over a week. And it was during that time that it really started to click for me. It had to do with the scale of the place and the qualities of that scale. I was really taken by the enormity of the scale of the landscape, and yet the focus of the artists making something that in many cases was quite small, but incredibly powerful. And that led to significant changes in the design. The idea of creating this much larger gallery that could start to insinuate that scale, but then creating a series of other spaces throughout the new center that would allow a greater amount of intimacy to take place. And that was really the key. That was the thing that turned it for me.
When I lived in the Arctic, we had a very intimate relationship with snow and ice and wind that was really stunning. We lived on a fjord up on Hudson Strait. And the first day we moved to the settlement, the water truck broke down, and so we had to melt snow to get water because there was no water delivery going on. But snow and cold and wind are such a feature of Inuit life in the Arctic. How did you work that into the building?
I don't think you can ever fully capture how magnificent, awe-inspiring, phenomenal that landscape and place are. But I did think that we could begin to give the building some of the life that you see in that landscape, especially around the way that the light changes all of the time. And in the exterior form of the building, we've created a series of scallops to the exterior form, a series of concave and convex scallops that will capture the amazing Winnipeg light over the course of the day. The stone that we've chosen was chosen because it reacts to the light throughout the course of the day in very beautiful ways. And I think in that way, the facade of the building starts to have an aliveness that you start to see in the landscape of the north. And then on the inside, especially in the main gallery, it's not a rectilinear box, which is a different type of challenge for people who will be working there and curators. It's not a traditional space, but a more flowing space, maybe a more organic space. There aren't hard corners. All toplit with skylights, so that the inside of the gallery will feel suffused with that light from the sky. And that was also something that I felt like was a quality of the North that we could try to connect to.
Yes, the light when I lived there was very unusual in that the sun would come up in our settlement at about 10 o'clock in the morning and it would set at 3. Right. And so it was quite fantastic to be exposed to that kind of light. And then there was a radiance the rest of the time. Heather, how does the environment and the light affect the kind of work that Inuit artists are producing? I mean, the soapstone work and some of the work in bone is very old, but what are the materials that Inuit artists are using now to express their artistic sensibilities?
Let me first just say, Terry, it sounds like you were in the north. You were in Nunavut.
Nunavut
during the wintertime only.
Yep.
In the summertime, we can have 24 hours of sun, so the light changes quite dramatically, which is probably not that different from Winnipeg, honestly. Like, we're maybe not quite on the same level, but where I grew up in Happy Valley Goose Bay, the winter times were like that. Like, the sun comes up after you're already at work or at school, and it sets before you get home at the end of the day. But the trade-off is, in the summertime, you know, you've got the sun setting at midnight and rising again at 3 o'clock in the morning. So you have these, you know, kids are out all night. You have this amazing engagement with the environment. And I agree with what Michael said. The light in the building is what's really stunning, because when you are inside, when everyone is finally able to get inside, you will see that it's not cold. It's actually, it's this huge, the gallery space especially is this massive space, you know, like no straight lines, no straight walls, like they were saying, but it's not cold. It's actually, it's really stunningly beautiful, but in a warm kind of a way. And I think that probably has a lot to do with the great big skylights coming in. So you were asking about materials in the Arctic, and yeah. You know, a lot of artists today, no matter whether they, you know, I wouldn't say that there are artists who are contemporary artists that are traditional, but there are some people who are still working in very long traditions, and other people who are doing things with new media and other media. And I would say that a lot of artists are still very invested in working with materials from our land. And so sealskin and caribou hide, bone, whale bone, all of those things are still really prevalent in there. And you'll see it all through the building when it opens. You'll see all those kinds of things. Even artists who are using, for example, drone photography. Yeah, there we go. You have some whale bone. So a lot of whale bone.
I was given this in Pengnurtuk.
Wow.
And, you know, it's part of a bowhead whale spine that's been carved into a fantastic bird.
Yeah, amazing.
Yeah.
How many more of those do you have? I'm like, what do I have that I can pull out?
Well,
I've got earrings on my desk, unfortunately. These are muskox horn. That's all I have.
Right.
And,
well, if you want any of mine for your gallery, please, you know, for the IAC, you can have them.
I think that's the exciting thing, is that we'll see all kinds of different material and media, but that sort of Inuit materials, we were talking about aesthetics earlier, those are sort of woven through all of the practices. So even when you see, for example, drone photography is really, really big in the Arctic right now. Digital, and it's some of the most spectacular things, but you're still seeing that it is drone photography of the land, because now we get all these new perspective on things that we have always loved, and it's just a way to share it with the world.
Climate change is a big concern in much of the world, but in the Arctic, it's much more evident. In what way is that changing the lives of the Inuit people that you know?
I think that it can be very scary times, for sure. We're seeing the melting permafrost, and with that also comes the threat of resource extraction and more incursions into the north, which can bring pollutants and other things that people are worried about. I think right now, one of the things that in my community, and I know lots of other places, is also a concern, is that the weather's just not predictable like it used to be. So, you know, when there was like a certain, you know, down to the, you know, maybe it's the last week of May when the ice would start to melt, for example, and then you'd kind of be able to pinpoint when it was going to be not safe and when you had to wait until you could get out in your boat again. And that has become less and less predictable. So sometimes the ice melts very quickly, and other times it melts very late. And because we use ice like a highway, you know, like you take your skidoos out on it in the wintertime and go hunting over the ice, because that's unpredictable, it can lead to, you know, of course, snowmobiles are quite heavy as well, so people going through the ice and that kind of thing. It's also, of course, and perhaps other architects will have questions around this that I can't answer, but it also has an impact on the quality of housing in the north, and because the sort of melting and freezing temperatures and the more humidity in the air and all these kinds of factors are having an impact on housing. And then the final thing is another architecture kind of a thing, which is that houses have been built on permafrost, and the permafrost is starting to melt. And that's very, very scary, because that means that even the land underneath, which has been frozen, you know, for millennia, are starting to kind of give way, and that's caused a few landslides in a few places. So I'm certainly not a climate change expert, but just knowing anecdotally about what's happening in my friends' communities and in my family's communities, those are all kinds of factors that are happening right now. The most urgent one is how scary it can be to navigate on the ice. And there's actually a number of social media and technology efforts underway to try and track and just sort of get the word out to community members when things are safe and unsafe.
So Michael Maltzan, Heather talked there about housing, and I know that housing is a big, I was going to say preoccupation, but that wouldn't be fair. You are driven, particularly in Los Angeles, to work with homeless people to provide better housing. And homelessness is a big issue all across Canada, in the south and in the north. What thoughts do you have from your perspective in designing housing for people who are homeless when finding yourself in Canada, particularly in the north, where a shortage of housing or inadequate housing is a central issue?
Terry, that's an enormous question, because the inaccessibility to affordable housing has really become a global phenomenon. We're working on it specifically really in Los Angeles, where that's really where the majority of our work around this has been. In that case, in that situation, what we have found working with the nonprofits that we're involved with is that building housing in and of itself, it's a good thing, but it's not enough. The real key over the last 15 years here in the successful projects have been bolstering those communities that can grow up around these new buildings with supportive services, and that really is a range, allowing, giving the residents a connection to healthcare, psychological care, to vocational training, really a full range of support to allow them to re-navigate their lives, but more than anything, to help stabilize and grow community. Very often here, the challenge has been that homeless individuals have been on the streets for many, many years and have lost their capability to connect to any kind of community. And that disconnect is what often stands between somebody really getting a foundation underneath them and on their way and not. So I don't feel comfortable necessarily talking about the challenges specifically in the north, but there's certain universal aspects to housing, and a lot of it is, I believe, very human. How do you create places that are good places for people to live, but more than anything, help them create and sustain community?
Stephen, the WAG is in the heart of downtown Winnipeg, as now is the Inuit Art Centre. I used to work just down the street at the CBC, and you must know, I certainly saw, there were lots of people who were apparently homeless on the street, evident in downtown Winnipeg. in what way will the Inuit Art Centre change the relationship with Indigenous people, Inuit people in downtown Winnipeg? Will it have a role aside from just showing beautiful and provocative artworks?
Completely. And even in my first conversations with Michael about not just the WAG site, but the grid, the context around us, who was living there, the pathways of First Nations people that go right by the WAG, all those things entered into, I would say, what makes the model for the new museum. Clearly, the role of art and the documentation, the collecting, the exhibiting of art is important. But if you think of the real estate that art museums and galleries hold in cities and downtowns across the country, the opportunity we have to not lower the threshold, but to expand the invitation so that the spaces we offer are there for everyone to look, to rethink of what stops people from walking through our doors, from lingering, from hanging out. The fact is, 75% of millennials go to museums to chill out. We have to rethink why we're there. And it is the dialogue that I've had largely with the Indigenous Advisory Circle at the WAG to understand how we can respond, be more meaningful, be more useful. It involves the type of programs we do. It involves the price of admission. It involves physical access, visual access. It involves who is working inside and if the people outside see themselves in what we do inside. All those things are happening. We have a long way to go, but I would say the more we listen to what people want and need and expect from a museum, the better chance we have of being relevant in the next 50 years.
I have to say, I got a chill as you were talking about that perspective as a citizen of Winnipeg who cares deeply about everybody in the community, but particularly the people who are the underclass. I'm thrilled to hear you describe how the WAG and the Inuit Art Centre is going to be thinking about the larger community and playing a role in enhancing the quality of life for all Winnipeggers. So Heather, what are you planning for your first show? Do we have a sense yet as to the date of the opening? Is that clarified yet?
He was smiling at me. I think that we're going to say early in 2021 is all that we can confirm for now. And it's still, we're still in a global pandemic. Like, let's hope that things are going as well. So I can't give you anything much firmer than that. But I will say that we are planning levels of the opening, so what people can engage with on the ground. And I'm really excited about our initial plans for that opening whenever it does happen, is that the very first day will be, to get back to the conversation you're just having, will be for Indigenous peoples only. So the local Inuit community will all be invited in, local Indigenous peoples, members of the circle who are here in Manitoba. So the first look, the first event is going to be all for them and will be in ceremony. So that's one of the things that I'm super excited about the opening. And then, of course, the opening of the building, the opening of the exhibition, the family day, like wanting to have lots of young people to get to come through. But then we are also anticipating a sort of in tandem virtual launch, because, of course, it's very unlikely that a lot of the artists who are in the exhibition and the Inuit who have been involved over the last number of years on designing the vision and inspiring what's going to be happening inside of the building, the Inuits and Inuvialuit Circle members who are all across the country. I'm very much hoping that myself and the curatorial team will all get to be here together. That's Krista Uliuk-Zawadski, Asiniak, and Kablusiak. And so the four of us together are from all the 4 different regions of Inuit Unanga, but we're thankfully, seems like we might all be able to come and do the quarantine and then be at the opening. But because of everything that's happening in the world right now, we're trying to think about how to make this opening exciting and accessible for everyone, even if we can't all be in the space right away. And hopefully we'll be able to coordinate more in-person visits as time goes on. So we're thinking about all these things. We want it to be exciting anywhere you are.
Are you going to help to teach us Inuktitut? I know when I was living in our settlement, we had some people over to dinner and we made this incredible, like as much as we could from the co-op store in the settlement. And one of the man at the end of the meal said, Mamatuk Marelek, which I think means, boy, that's really delicious.
Yeah.
So I was really curious. I hope you're going to teach us some Inuktitut to get a better sense of how the language works and the beauty of it.
So I'm an Inuktitut learner myself. My father's a residential school survivor, and so I didn't hear it very much when I was growing up in Labrador. But now as an adult, I've been learning more and more all the time. But I think it's a life's commitment to working towards fluency. But what we do have is a lot of really amazing Inuit. The Inuktitut, which is many different dialects, is actually there's a lot of speakers all across the country, and so we have several dialects, and we're hoping that the new exhibition opening and the building itself will be a place where you will see and read and hear all of those different dialects, and you'll get to see them in the Slavic text as well as in Roman orthography, and very importantly, get to hear people speaking Inuktitut and not just sort of engaging with it in text.
I almost went at one point to work for a communication society out of Nain.
Oh, yeah.
The Okalakatakit Society, I think it was called. The OK Society, some people called it. I ended up working in St. Louis for Takermit Nippengat, the Quebec dialect of Inuktitut, which was pretty thrilling. I was like in Inuktitut immersion because there were about 30 people in the settlement who weren't Inuit, and then everybody else was, and everybody was eager to teach and help.
Amazing. Yeah. In Nain is a lot of fluency, Nain and Hopedale up the coast, and then it sort of changes depending on where you are. But I grew up in Happy Valley Goose Bay, which is a Inuit and Innu First Nation and settler community. It's where the air base is. So I didn't have it in school.
So Michael Maltzan, if we could turn back to architecture, what did you do for the Inuit Art Centre in terms of design in relation to the Gustavo da Roza original Winnipeg Art Gallery building, which is, I have to say, not just because I'm a Winnipegger, it's one of my favorite buildings in the world, but its relationship to the new Inuit Art Centre. How did you work that out?
Well, it's a favorite of mine as well, Terry. It's really an achievement as a building. And when you realize when that building was built, was an incredibly adventurous and very forward building. I didn't want to screw it up. I didn't want to mess up that building. I felt a real responsibility to it. The interesting thing about in terms of the way that the existing WAG sits in the city is that it's on a triangle. It really has two very distinct sides between Memorial and Colony. But there was a back to it, which is where the site for the IAC is. And what I realized was this new building could, in a sense, do two things. And maybe this sounds too architectural, but I was interested in seeing if we could make a new building that had its own identity, but also in a way helped complete the three sides of the block with the existing WAG building. Yeah. So we've had a saying in the office that we were trying to make an extraordinary object that completes an extraordinary object. And that was really a goal that not only from a sculptural standpoint, but to go back to the initial mission that Stephen and his team laid out of the new IAC in partnership with the WAG. It's meant to be an institution, a place that connected to all sides of the city, all directions in Winnipeg. And by finding this way of making a balance between those two buildings, but allowing each one to have its own unique identity, I think we've achieved that. It will reach out and connect to all directions around that site, 360 degrees of Winnipeg. And I think that's a powerful metaphor for what the real values and ambitions of the IAC and the WAG are.
Now, a local architecture firm, Cibinel, a very talented group of people,
Yes.
were working with you on the ground here as well. What part did they play in the design and the creation of the Inuit Art Centre?
Well, George Cibinel, who leads that firm, has been involved from the very beginning and came with us to the Arctic, and also came on some of the tours of other precedent museums that we were looking at studying to see what was happening around these kinds of collections around the world. George has really been, and his team have been real support all through the design. And then as the building went into construction, they have been the day in, day out on the site, eyes and ears for us, and have been real partners in the whole process. The project would not happen without George and his team being involved. That's been an important collaboration.
And so, Heather, we were talking about your plans for the opening or the first show. Please tell me that you plan to bring the jerry cans down to play in Winnipeg.
Well, I mean, here's the thing. I don't know that we're bringing anyone down to play. There is actually a number of, because there's such a thriving Inuit community here in Winnipeg and other urban Inuit locations, we do have some local Inuit musicians who will be performing, but we are also looking forward to potentially having, obviously, not just art to celebrate the opening, but also music and maybe circus, maybe all kinds of performance could be happening. And storytelling certainly is something that we'd like to bring in. And it goes back into this idea that, for Inuit, it's visual arts are not separate from performing arts, are not separate from music, but that it is all Inuit cultural production.
Are you familiar with the literature of Michael Maltzan from?
Yes, he's actually been a storyteller. He's been doing things with the Winnipeg Art Gallery all along. I think if you probably go to WAG-IAC, you can find a little bit more information about that, but he is just magical, and he's here in Manitoba. So
yes, I know when he brought out his first notable book, Baseball Bats for Christmas, I got him on the radio, and the host at the time, Peter Zosky, just fell in love with Michael. And Michael kept coming back to the show with new books and new stories, and stories about life in the settlement when he was a kid, and they would drop Christmas trees out of the bush planes, and they didn't know what Christmas trees were, and that's where the name Baseball Bats for Christmas came from. They cut up the trees and turned them into baseball bats.
Oh, that's just brilliant. Yeah, no, he's brilliant and hilarious and such an engaging storyteller.
So, Stephen, what happens now going forward with the creation of the center? At what stage of construction is it?
Well, as of last week, we have interim occupancy. So we are now transferring thousands of objects into this 3-story visible vault. The studios on the penthouse level are installed. The gallery shop, which kind of straddles both buildings right between on the street, open on the weekend. You'll continue to see work on the exterior, the hardscaping, the landscaping. The white granite facade is pretty well done. There is still work to be done inside, but largely, I would say it's about 98% done. There's still a lot of work to do. Heather's show will take several months to install, as well as the movement of, the installation of the visible vault will take a few months. But we are gearing up, as Heather said, to early in the new year, and we're just assessing where things stand with COVID in terms of numbers and thresholds for audiences. Our goal is to, when we open, and largely the first opening may be a virtual opening, to give access to as many people as possible, and then spend that first year as if it was 365 days of opening nights. That's kind of our goal.
So which notable Inuit artists by name will we be seeing? I know over the years, Canadians feel in a certain way that we've heard a lot of names percolate to the surface. Some of the artworks showing up I know there's a billboard down the street from the gallery that used to have an Inuit image on it. And there were stamps and those kinds of things. But remind us the great artists from the Inuit tradition.
You're asking me, or
Well, I'm asking you, and Heather can share it.
There are about 100 artists in Inuit, the big show. The space is 40,000 square feet. We're spilling out into the whole building. So if you are asking me to pick a couple of those names and highlight them, I think that's a trap. I'm not going to do it because there's so many amazing artists. But one of the things that we are really excited about for Inuit in particular, and of course, the collection is also the largest one in the world. So that's also, how do you decide who to give a shout out to right now? But one of the things that I'm really excited about is that we have a number of artists there's about 15 commissions, there's about 15 loans from international places and throughout Canada, and then there's about 60 works that are from the amazing collections of both the WAG and the government of Nunavut, which is on a long-term loan to the Winnipeg Art Gallery. And so we had a really difficult time trying to select down from what was really like the whole circumpolar world, and then also commissioned artists, and then also the collection of, those two combined is how many works is that, Stephen, that you have right now on site? Like 20,000 works of Inuit art? Like,
close to 20,000.
Just amazing. So, and that's clothing, and it's jewelry, and it's sculpture and miniatures and wall hangings, and just like all kinds of things that are already in the collection. But one of the things that I'm really excited about that we've done as a team is to invite some artists who you maybe know them in a different context to make work for us. So like Mata Kayak is a fashion designer who's based in Ottawa, and our colleague Krista reached out to her and commissioned her to make a work of wearable art. And so I think we might be releasing some teasers about what that's going to look like, but it's this incredible sealskin floral gown. I think I'm allowed to talk about it. Or we have Jesse Dunglik, who's a well-known jeweler from Iqaluit, and he has made a sealskin spacesuit. So like just people, or Beatrice Deer and her colleague and friend Julia Garnier, Beatrice is of course a very well-known Inuit musician, and she is making a sort of 3D, I think it's wearable art. We've seen some pictures, it's gonna be wild. And so we're really excited about this sort of genre crossing work that some of the artists are doing for the commissions, and then also the opportunity to bring in artists from Alaska and Greenland into conversation with Canada as well. We have these sort of national borders, but we think of ourselves very much as one people. So from the Inupiat territory to Greenland, I think that's another one of the kind of fun things about this show. And I hope that the Inuit Art Centre carries that kind of ethos forward.
One of the early Inuit art institutions that rose to the surface or rose to Canadians' awareness is the print studio in Cape Dorset. Mm. And I had the great good fortune of visiting there and seeing the work being done. So Cape Dorset must be in the collection, right?
Of course. Stephen, would you hazard a guess?
In fact, Kingay, the Dorset, the annual print the whole series was just released at the WAG on the weekend. And as Heather's pointed out, her show will penetrate pretty well every level of the Inuit Art Centre. But then you have a 3-story visible vault as you walk in, which will house close to 5,000 works. And in terms of carvers, all the masters will be there. And then we'll continue to exhibit Inuit art in the WAG building. And there will be some extraordinary major stone commissions outside. So before you get even inside, you're going to be seeing, but also, one of my favorite artists, the film director, Zacharias Kunik, we're working with. And Heather's has some amazing ideas to be sharing and screening materials on the exterior, on the interior. So it's literally going to penetrate the fabric.
That fantastic film, The Fast Runner of his, that is so brilliant. Wow.
He's made new work. He's made new work for the exhibition. I don't know if I'm allowed to talk about that either,
Stephen.
Go
ahead.
He's done a piece. Isuma has created a work for the exhibition, and so we are doing something really exciting. I'm like, I don't know how much I'm allowed to talk about, but we're building Zach's hunting cabin. You're hearing this first. We are building the hunting cabin, his actual hunting cabin inside of the gallery space, and then turning the inside into a sort of a 360 film experience. So there's a really cool video project that's going to happen inside. I won't tell you what it is, but as we are approaching now and things are getting more solid, it's really exciting to think about the kind of cool stuff you're going to see.
Have you been to the Angmarlik Center in Pangnirtuk by any chance? They have, it's a fantastic Inuit Art Centre, a small one in Pangnirtuk, and they have a house made of whalebone ribs, because it was a big whaling center, and in fact, they still have the big cast iron pots on the shore where they boiled the whale meat. And I spent some time with a man there who was 80, who told me how he hunted the bowhead whale by himself in a kayak. And he told us the story for the radio, and he was just a totally astonishing. You know, bowhead whales, right, are 80 feet long.
Yeah.
And
I have
so
actually never been to Pang.
and he was out there in his kayak by himself, telling us how you persuade this bowhead whale to die with you, with his harpoon in the whale. It was an amazing thing.
We took Michael out the Cumberland Sound out in Pang, and Michael, his wife and kids, we were out there in the middle, no life jackets, nothing, and we were looking at seals, but it was. And then we walked along that national park there, where you literally sink down about 1.5 feet into that amazing, it's odd.
Yeah. Well, in that national park, those mountains are like Switzerland mountains. They're so astonishing. Were there significant collectors, Stephen, who contributed to the vast collection that the WAG has? Where did your works come from in the beginning?
You know, our collection today, which numbers close to 14,000, I would say it's comprised of individual acquisitions, purchases, gifts, large collections coming from private collectors around the world, government collectors, what used to be called Indian and Northern Affairs, the Hudson Bay Company, collections, particularly graphic work from certain co-ops, works that were donated or purchased together, collectors who have followed the WAG collection over the years, and Swinton, Winrob, a number of major collectors, their collections are now at the WAG. And it continues. Not only do we collect, we commission works. And there's no question with the Inuit Art Centre opening, already the attention we're getting in terms of finding homes for collections, not just within Canada, but from around the world. You know, we have Andrew Kapik's complete graphic output from a collector in North Carolina, and we have works from Switzerland. What really excites me is to broaden the collection across what we call the Inuit Nunavut, and actually move beyond the borders that Heather was talking about to look at Greenlandish, to look at works from Alaska, to, as we call ourselves, an Inuit Art Centre. What does that really mean?
Well, there are Inuit in Siberia too, aren't there, Heather?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So will we see any, do you see any of their work, Stephen? Just curious. I'm wondering if any of it turns up in the WAG collection.
You know, we do have small pockets of what we say Inuit works from outside of Canada, and that's a particular interest of mine to see how Heather can help us expand that. It involves conversations with other curators, other artists, and other collectors.
Mm. So, Michael Maltzan, where does the Inuit Art Centre fit in the context of the full body of your work as you look back to the beginning in 1995? What's its place?
Well, I hope it's a building that represents certainly one of my most important achievements at a personal level. It's meant a great deal to me personally from the beginning. When we started, when we took that trip to the north, there's something that connected me to the work, to the project, that went beyond the normal connection, involvement you have with a lot of projects. There was something deeply profound I felt about this project, and that was an important personal connection. I hope that the IAC really represents an idea about what architecture can do to create, as I mentioned before, connections and tie cultures and ideas together. That's something that I've been looking for and working with and pushing my work to do. I believe our body of work is first and foremost about making connections between people, between different parts of cities, between different social, economic groups. The IAC for me is the most extraordinary example of that idea. Architecture in the service of truly making connections between groups, between people. I believe that when the building is open and when we get through this pandemic and people are really able to visit it, it will be incredible to stand in front of the work. It will be incredible to drive by the building at night and see all the way into the ground floor and into the visible vault, and for it to light up like a lantern in the middle of Winnipeg. But what I think is going to be the most profound moment is where people who might not necessarily have any kind of common experience get to run into each other, stand next to each other, see something that for a moment even connects their experiences, brings them together. I think architecture can do that. I don't think that's too ambitious. I think that's what architecture can do, and I think the IAC is one of the very best examples of my work trying to accomplish that goal.
Stephen, what are you thinking as you hear Michael Maltzan say these things?
Oh, I couldn't have paid him to say that. But, I would, this is how I like to think of it. And I loved how he talked about that triangular site. The Inuit Art Centre is, let's say it's a 40,000 square foot building next to a 140,000 square foot building. But the Inuit Art Centre project is really a 185,000 square foot project, because what's happened in the Inuit Centre has changed the WAG physically, intellectually, emotionally. It's changed the site. It's actually gotten us to rethink what our role is in the community. It's pushed us. It's brought us into innovative thinking. And I would say it's breathed life into that cultural campus and given us a chance to have a rightful, meaningful place in the community, to be useful. The most important thing for me is that the Inuit, the indigenous communities around us, will see this as a place to gather, to dialogue, to change, to demonstrate. And there's a chance that the Inuit Art Centre, because museums around the country and North America are watching this project, that it's a game-changing project for the museum industry in terms of how we do business and why we're here and what is our purpose. And Michael has pushed us, challenged us. The Inuit have pushed us. The Indigenous Circle has encouraged us. And I think now is our time to show them that we've listened and that we will make a difference and we will be around for another 50 years.
Heather Iglesias, so in what way has the Inuit Art Centre changed how Inuit artists and Inuit people view Winnipeg's place in all of this? We are very far south, but there is a community of Inuit people in the city who've been coming for years. There's a wonderful medical residence down the street on Burnell where Inuit people have been coming for years. But how are they changing their view of Winnipeg, the Winnipeg Art Gallery, and this place now that the Inuit Art Centre has become such a magnet for magnificent art?
Well, I can't speak for all Inuit. I'll just say how it's changing for me, and I just want to say that one of the things that I'm most excited about is that, and a big thank you to Stephen for making such space in this new center and in this new building for Inuit leadership and for other Indigenous leadership. We've got our 4-person curatorial team. We also have, to my knowledge, the first ever Inuk exhibition designer, Nicole Luke, who is a student at the University of Manitoba doing her graduate studies right now. And she's doing an amazing job and bringing Inuit cultural ideas into the design. We've got Inuit graphic designers that we're working with, Thomasy Mengiuk especially. Inuit educators. We've got Inuit, another student here who's working on education and designing programs to engage youth. And we've got lots of Inuit working on the audio guide with us so that we have many Inuit voices brought into the space. Our project manager is an Inuk, Jocelyn Pirinen, who's the first ever assistant curator of Inuit art at the WAG. And then of course, we've got everyone at the circle, including my co-chair, Dr. Julie Nagum, and all of the Manitoban Indigenous peoples who are pulling towards this with us, along with all of the Inuit from the circle from all across the north and south, because of course there's a lot of Inuit living in the south right now as well. So I don't want to say how they might be feeling about it, but I will say that what we're doing is kind of setting a precedent with this institution that is unlike anything that's happened anywhere in the country before. We're not the first Inuit-led exhibitions to ever happen, but the scale that we've been able to do it on here is just so incredibly inspiring. And I hope that the Inuit Art Centre becomes a place where lots of Inuit can continue to get this training and opportunities, and that people who are visiting the health center can come in and pick up an iPad at the front desk and say, show me all my relatives, and like do a quick search and then find out where everything is in the museum, where they can go and see things that were made by their aunts and uncles and grandparents and great-grandparents, or that someone could go to the research center and say, I think that you interviewed that the curator Darlene Wight, I think you interviewed my aunt 25 years ago. Can I hear it here now? And so being able to really engage that way, and to get it out of the storage spaces and behind, and to have the visible vault out, and to have the center and the artwork just be so much more accessible than it's been. I think that is a really important first step forward, because for a long time in Inuit art history, work left the north and came to the south, and then artists didn't get to see their works again, and they didn't get to engage with it. And we have the opportunity through technology and the design of the building being really open, and all these sort of really innovative things that are happening that are making that connection more reciprocal, and I think more exciting that way.
You remind me that when I was working with CBC, I did a lot of documentary work in the Arctic, in Pond Inlet and in Pangnirtung and in Iqaluit. And when I was in Pond Inlet at the top of Baffin Island, there was an iceberg out in Eclipse Sound, which we visited out in the Sound, and we pulled off. It was beginning to melt, and we pulled off some icicles and brought them back to the elders in the community so they could drink the water from the melting iceberg, which they told us was a really precious thing for them.
Amazing.
And so I'm wondering if you're going to be able to get an iceberg down to the Inuit Art Centre. Can I help you to work on that?
Is that in the budget, or?
No, we're not going to have bottled water, so I will not promise that.
I think that's fair. Some things are just for the Arctic to enjoy.
So Michael Maltzan, final thoughts from you about our conversation here today and what you're thinking about this project and your beginning of a significant project that will have a grand legacy in Canada.
That architecture lasts for a long time, and that means that the legacy, how it continues to live over time, is extraordinarily important. The opening is going to be fantastic because that's a celebration of all of the work that's been done to this point, and really a launching point. But as Stephen said in the the very start of this project, when we were talking about what the goals were, he said, challenge us. And the reason that he wanted us to challenge what the IAC would be, what its relationship to the WAG would be, what its connection to Winnipeg would be, how it would challenge museums in general, was because this was meant to be a building that, as much as anything, was for the future. It was important for it to be about the history and the current generations of artists and museum goers, but fundamentally, it's about the generations that will come to the IAC and the WAG in the future. And if the building didn't continue to challenge our expectations today, and try to imagine what an institution like this, what the IAC would be like in the future, that we might fail. And that's the exciting thing, to see if the questions we asked ourselves, the ideas that we made from that debate, that conversation, really do have that legacy into the future. I feel pretty confident. I'm excited to see how it continues to live into that future.
And Heather Iglesiorti, what do you see as the impact of the Inuit Art Centre looking ahead to the future?
Oh, that's a great question. Well, for starters, I hope that it is a site where people really can appreciate, you've got this incredibly monumental building. It's not just, as Stephen was saying, it's not just a house for the collection. It is a place to really celebrate Inuit culture. And it's huge, many times there's Inuit art and collections all across the country, all around the world. But many times the Inuit art collection is sort of to the side of the European art collections or the other works, other more monumental works. And now here we have this building that really says, no, Inuit art is as worthy of this kind of an institution as any other art form, and deserves to be celebrated on the scale as any global art tradition. So that to me is really exciting, because it feels like we are honoring it on a international scale, like any other artist tradition that we've considered mastery. Yeah. So that to me is the incredible legacy going forward of this institution, is that it's like, the building itself says this work is important. This deserves to be celebrated. It deserves this beautiful house.
Mm. Stephen, I see behind you in your office there that you have a wonderful collection of lovely small pieces of art, of Inuit pieces. When you look forward to, are you?
No, it's okay.
They're quite fantastic. I should show you my other little seal that Molly did for me. I think of this as my Mae West, because this seal, she's laying in this very luxurious way, and this was Molly's idea of this was his second piece for us in Saint Louis. But Stephen, as we conclude these conversations, it must be thrilling for you to hear your architect and your curator talk about the potential for the lasting impact of what you've created here. I want to say thank you for all that you've done, and for your vision, and for all the people who supported your vision. How are you feeling today?
I'm feeling amazing. And if I could say this, I think great architecture is about a conversation. And from the start, we had these conversations, not just in Winnipeg, but in the North, in LA, across the country. And I just have an image I have to share with you, because it's a photograph I have of Michael sitting on the floor of the home of Elisabeth Schuletuk in Pangerton. And she's giving him the thumbs up as we talk about this project. And I really think it'll come down to that grade 3 class, or that 12-year-old, when they come in, and it's not just about art, it's about science, climate change, gender, race, sovereignty. All those conversations can take place at the Inuit Art Centre, because art is a voice. It's the most critical one of the best tools we have to communicate with each other. And to think that we could be a forum for the K-12 curriculum tells me there's a great future ahead of us.
Well, I'm so thrilled to have had the chance to spend this time with the three of you. Thank you so much. And thank you for being prepared to go deep on lots of different things. Thank you for your creativity, for your diligence, for your commitments, and thank you for the future that you're creating. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Terry. Nakumi.
Thank you.
Nakumik.